A wave of shock and condemnation followed a chilling public statement from Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, who issued a direct and personal warning to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Speaking to a crowd of reporters on the steps of the Capitol, the veteran senator, long known for his hawkish foreign policy views, abandoned diplomatic norms in a fiery address. The statement came in the immediate aftermath of what has been described as one of the most brutal Russian assaults on a Ukrainian civilian center since the conflict began. Reports from Western Ukraine detailed a coordinated pre-dawn missile and drone attack on the historic city of Lviv, a location previously seen as a relative sanctuary for displaced person and cultural heritage. International observers confirmed that the strikes targeted a sprawling humanitarian complex, including a makeshift hospital and a distribution center for food and medical supplies, leading to catastrophic loss of life and injuring hundreds of civilians. The visceral image of the smoldering ruins broadcast globally created a fresh wave of outrage and prompted Senator Graham's impassionate remarks. Visibly angered and foregoing his usual prepared notes, Senator Graham addressed the camera directly. He began by recounting the horrors of the Lviv attack, describing it not as a legitimate act of war, but as a calculated act of mass murder orchestrated by the Kremlin. He accused the Russian military of deliberately targeting non-combatants to break the wills of the Ukrainian people. Flanked by several congressional colleagues who appeared equally somber, Graham's voice rose with indignation as he declared that the international community's passive condemnations and incremental sanctions were no longer a sufficient response to such barbarism. He argued that the strategy of containing the conflict had failed and that the source of the aggression must be confronted directly. It was then that he delivered the line that would echo across the globe. Staring intently into the cameras as if addressing the Russian leader himself, Senator Graham stated with cold resolve, "Vladimir Putin, you can run, but you cannot hide from the judgment of the world, and you cannot hide from the consequences of your action. You are a war criminal. To those around him, know that your allegiance to a monster will seal your own fate. And to Putin himself, I say this directly. The world is closing in on you. Your turn is coming." The declaration, widely interpreted as a threat against the Russian president's life, or at minimum a call for his violent removal from power, sent immediate tremors through the international political landscape. The remarks created a significant and immediate challenge for the administration of President Donald Trump, forcing it to navigate the fallout from a senior senator of the president's own party making such an explosive statement. The White House was quick to respond, though its statement was carefully calibrated to walk a fine line. The official press release condemned the Russian attack on Lviv in the strongest possible term, calling it an unforgivable atrocity, and promising that the United States would work with its partner to hold those responsible accountable. However, the statement noticeably avoided endorsing Senator Graham's specific language. It did not mention the senators by name, instead emphasizing that the official policy of the United States government is focused on providing Ukraine with the means to defend itself and achieving a diplomatic resolution that respects Ukrainian sovereignty, while keeping all options on the table to protect American interests and global stability. The task of managing the diplomatic crisis fell squarely on the shoulders of Secretary of State Marco Rubio. At a hastily convened press briefing at the State Department, Secretary Rubio faced a barrage of questions from the international press corps. He appeared composed but stern, beginning his remarks by offering condolence to the victims of the Lviv attack and reaffirming America's unwavering support for Ukraine. When asked directly about Senator Graham's comments, Rubio chose his words with extreme care. He acknowledged the senator's passion and his right to express his profound anger, stating that the sentiment of outrage was shared by every American and every decent person around the world. However, he clarified that the senator's remark do not represent the official diplomatic posture of the United States. Secretary Rubio stressed that the administration's policy is not one of personal threats, but of strategic pressure. He outlined a strategy based on strengthening Ukraine's military, tightening the economic ties on Moscow through robust enforcement of sanctions, and isolating Russia on the world stage. He deflected questions about whether Graham's word constituted a call for assassination, repeating that the United States seeks a change in Russian behavior, not a specific change in its leadership through extra legal means, though he added that the Russian people may one day make that choice for themselves. In a separate briefing across the Potomac River, Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth offered a more muscular, though still official, perspective from the Pentagon. Secretary Hegseth, a military veteran, focused on the operational and strategic implications of the Lviv attack. He announced that he was in direct consultations with his Ukrainian counterparts and that the Department of Defense was accelerating the delivery of advanced air defense systems and long-range munitions to Ukraine. He described the Russian strikes as a sign of desperation from a military that is failing to achieve its strategic objectives on the battlefield and is resorting to terror tactics against civilians. When reporters pressed him on Senator Graham's warning to Putin, Secretary Hegseth sidestepped the political nature of the comment. Instead, he framed the issue in terms of military deterrence. He stated that the United States military and its NATO allies are at their highest states of readiness and that any Russian aggression, direct or indirect, against a NATO member state would be met with an overwhelming and decisive response. He concluded by saying that every Russian commander, from the lowest rank to the highest echelon in Moscow, should be aware that their actions are being monitored and that they will be held accountable under the international law of armed conflict. His message, while not as personal as Graham's, carried its own weight, signaling that the U.S. military was prepared for any escalation. Within the Hall of Congress, Senator Graham's statement ignited firestorms of debate, exposing deep divisions on foreign policy. Many of his Republican colleagues in the Senate and House rushed to his defense, echoing his sentiment and calling for a more aggressive posture toward Russia. They argued that years of cautious diplomacy had only emboldened Putin and that it was time for American leaders to speak with moral clarity and strength. They framed Graham's word not as a threat, but as a statement of fact about the inevitable consequence facing a dictator who commits mass atrocity. However, significant factions within the Republican Party voiced serious concern. Lawmakers from the more isolationist wing of the party criticized the senator's rhetoric as reckless and inflammatory. They argued that such personal threats against a foreign leader were dangerously escalatory and could provoke a wider war, potentially drawing the United States into a direct military confrontation with a nuclear-armed Russia. They called for a restraint and a renewed focus on American domestic issues rather than getting further entangled in a foreign conflict that does not directly threaten American national security. The Democratic response was equally complex. While universally condemning the Russian attack on Lviv, party leaders were critical of Senator Graham's approach. The Senate Minority Leader released a statement calling the senator's remarks irresponsible and dangerous. He argued that such freelancing on foreign policy undermines the official diplomatic efforts of the State Department and projects an image of chaos and division in American leadership. He called on President Trump to publicly repudiate the comments and to present a clear, coherent strategy for the Ukraine conflict to Congress and the American people. Other Democrats, while agreeing that the rhetoric was unhelpful, privately expressed that Graham's underlying frustration was justified. They used the moment to criticize what they termed the administration's inconsistent policy, urging a more robust and predictable package of aid for Ukraine and more severe sanctions against Russia's energy and financial sectors. The debate raged on cable news and social media, with pundits and politicians from both sides either championing Graham as a truth teller or condemning him as a warmonger. The international reactions to Senator Graham's words were swift and intense. In Moscow, the Kremlin responded with volcanic fury. Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov called the statement an unprecedented act of hostility and a clear endorsement of terrorism at the state level. He told Russian state media that Moscow considered the comments a direct threat against the president of the Russian Federation and that such statement would have serious consequences. He accused elements within the American political establishment of seeking to destabilize the world and provoke a direct clash of civilizations. The Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, issued her own diatribe. calling Senator Graham a deranged relic of the Cold War and warning that any attempt to harm the Russian leadership would be considered an act of war against the Russian state itself. Russian ambassadors in several key countries were instructed to lodge formal diplomatic protests. The Russian government used the incident to fuel its domestic propaganda, portraying the conflict as an existential struggle against an aggressive and morally bankrupt West that sought the dismemberment and destruction of Russia. In Kyiv, the reaction was predictably different. While the Ukrainian government did not issue a formal endorsement of Senator Graham's specific call to action, senior officials expressed gratitude for the strength of his support. An advisor to the Ukrainian presidential office told reporters that Senator Graham had articulated the feelings of millions of Ukrainians who see Vladimir Putin as a war criminal personally responsible for the death of their countrymen. The Ukrainian official said that while Ukraine's goal remains the liberation of its territory through military means, they welcomed the moral clarity of American leaders who were willing to call out the evil being perpetrated by the Kremlin. They saw the statement as a powerful signal of American resolve, one that would boost the morale of Ukrainian soldiers and citizens alike during a dark and difficult time. The response from America and NATO allies was one of profound anxiety and diplomatic unease. In Berlin, a German government spokesperson stated that while Germany stands in full solidarity with Ukraine, it did not believe that inflammatory rhetoric was a constructive path toward peace. The French Foreign Ministry in Paris issued a similar statement calling for de-escalation and emphasizing the need for a unified and coordinated diplomatic strategy among all NATO partners. In London, the British Foreign Secretary, while strongly condemning the Lviv attack, urged for calm and measured response, noting the high risk of miscalculations in such a tense environment. Privately, European diplomats expressed frustration that such a high-profile American senator would make a unilateral statement that could potentially force their hand or trigger a Russian reaction that would engulf the entire continent in a wider conflict. They were now in the difficult position of having to reassure their own populations while also trying to gauge the official policy of their most powerful ally, the United States. China, a key strategic partner for Russia, seized on the incident to advance its own geopolitical narrative. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing condemned Senator Graham's remark as a reflection of America's hegemonic and aggressive foreign policy. The spokesperson stated that such threats violate the fundamental principle of the United Nations Charter and international law. Beijing called on all parties to exercise restraint and to work toward a political settlement, while implicitly blaming the United States and its allies for provoking the conflicts in the first place by expanding NATO eastward. The statement reinforcing the growing alignment between Moscow and Beijing, who both seeks to counter what they view as American dominance in global affairs. The immediate consequences of Senator Graham's declaration was a dramatic increase in global tensions. The world's attention became fixated on Moscow, awaiting a response that went beyond mere words. Analysts and intelligence officials began to speculate on what form Russia's retaliations might take. Some feared a direct, asymmetric attack against American interests or personal abroad. Others predicted a massive, punitive military escalation in Ukraine, designed to show that Russia would not be intimidated and to make Ukraine pay a heavy price for the statement of its American backer. The financial market grew volatile, with oil and gas prices surging on fear of a wider conflict that could disrupt global energy supplies. Diplomats worked frantically behind the scenes to open channels of communication and clarify intentions, hoping to prevent a spiral of escalations born from a single incendiary phrase. The world held its breath, caught between a senator's raw emotional threat and the potential for a devastatingly real military response from a cornered and enraged adversary. The chilling warning, meant to project strength and resolve, had instead pushed an already volatile world one step closer to the precipice of a much larger and more dangerous confrontation. The question on everyone's mind was no longer if Russia would respond, but how and when. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to Stoke Rich, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first ones on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.